Good day, student. I am sure by now you're getting familiar with my face. My name is Salis Shamuil Bala, and I'm your facilitator for GST 104 Use of Library. In our last class, we looked at types of library, and today we shall be looking at library services. So let's get to class and find out what this topic is all about. So, welcome back to the class. As I mentioned in my introduction, this is lesson 2, topic 2. And the topic of our discussion today is library services. I am Salis Shamil Bala, your tutor for the ST104 use of library. Now, let's recap based on the previous lessons that we conducted. In our last class, we talked about history of library. We also talked about the types of library. I'm sure you can remember them. And we said we have 5 types of libraries. And this include what? Yes, you are right. Academic libraries, school libraries, research and special libraries, public libraries, and national libraries. So as I mentioned earlier, today we shall be looking at library. But before then, let's see what are the objectives of today's lesson. Now, by the end of this lesson, you should be able to identify the two major types of library services and be able to distinguish between the technical services and the reader services. So these are our objectives. Now let's get into it. Library services. Broadly speaking, we have 2 types of library services, and they are technical services and reader services. Now, the technical services are performed usually by trained librarians, and the technical services is the backbone upon which reader services are rendered. And the reader services, on the other hand, are those services that the reader access and use. They usually represent the user and library contact. That is the converging point where the user and the library meet. So let's look at them in detail. Yeah, the technical services. As we mentioned earlier, these are the services that are performed by trained librarians, and that is why they are called technical services. Some people actually refer to them as behind the scenes services, just like in the movie. You know, the movie you're watching at home in your DVDs. There are some scenes that happens before the movie was brought to your device for viewing. And those scenes, those actions, those preparations and what have you are what we call behind the scene. So technical services are not usually visible to the reader. That is, they are not being performed in the glaring eyes of the public. They are done behind the scenes so that reader services can run smoothly. And technical services are many, and some of them include cataloging, classification, binary, accessioning, and database updating. Now, these services, they are technical because they require the expertise of the librarian to perform them so that the reader services can go on very smoothly. I'm sure you would have read 1 or 2 things about these services in the lesson notes. Move on to the reader services. Reader services are those services that are accessible by library users or patrons, which means it is the reader, as the name implies, that enjoy these services as offered by the library. And there are several reader services depending on the type of the library. Remember in our last class, we discussed of the types of library. Now the service a library renders depends on its nature and its type. But generally speaking, most libraries provide these services, and they include circulation services, reference services, current awareness services, selective dissemination of information, reservation services, interlibrary loan services, referral services, user education services, and what have you. So let us now briefly look at each of these services and see how they are performed and how they are accessed by the user. Now, let's first look at the circulation and reference. Circulation services allow users to borrow books from the library. Of course, each library have their own rules guiding this circulation service. Some will require you to register, and then the number of books you are allowed to borrow at a time, and the number of the duration that you can keep the book with you, and then the penalties in case of defaulting and what have you. So you can now see there is a client there trying to borrow, a book from the circulation services. And then we also have reference services, which can be seen as a personal assistance given by the reference librarian to a user in search of specific information. Most times users will come to the library and ask for specific information, and it is the reference librarian that usually provide the answers or give a guide on how information with regard to such queries can be retrieved. And now the current awareness services and the selective dissemination of information services. Now, the current awareness services displays new arrivals for users' perusal, and users are kept abreast of new resources in their area. Now, usually, when the library acquire new materials, they are displayed in the reception area or on CADEX where the new arrivals are displayed, so that users can have, a sort of appetizers for what is to come. And then we also have selective dissemination of information, which is usually a service that tries to individually alert users based on their area of interest on any new resource that the library acquires. So the next service we shall be looking at is the reservation and interlibrary loan. Reservation services come about because some materials are very limited quantity and they are in high demand. So people may have to actually get a reservation to use the materials for a particular period of time. They cannot be loaned out. And so this service is very important, especially with regard to materials that are, very hard to acquire and they are in heavy demand. Libraries also offer interlibrary loans, and this service allows two or more libraries to exchange their collections on loan basis for the benefit of their patrons. As you can see from the illustration there is a guy from ABC University trying to hand over an information resource to another person in XYZ University library. And this is how the exchange works. You transfer part of your collections to a library that need them, and then you collect from their own collections the information resource that you think your patrons are going to need, which are not available in your own collection. So now the referral and user education. Now this referral service, just as the name implies, a user will walk into a library and ask for a particular information resource which is not available, but the material is available in the sister library. So what you simply do is to refer him. Most times this service occurs when you have an understanding with the library and there may be a need for introduction letter or any other form of identification agreed upon by the the referral libraries. The last but not the least service is the user education. And this service usually equips the user on how to effectively use the library. It can be in form of orientations, book promotion, library weeks, or classroom instruction. Just like this course you are offering, this 104 use of library, which is trying to give you the necessary skills you require to make effective use of the library for your research and other academic. And finally, let us try and recap what we've discussed so far in this lesson. We talked about the library services, where we said we basically have two types of library services, and these are technical services and the reader services. Can you remember what we said about technical services? Oh, yes, we did mention that technical services are those services that are performed by specialists, that is, trained librarians. They are the ones who conduct technical services. And these services are the backbone, they are the platform upon which the reader services are provided and implemented. And we said the reader services are those services that readers directly enjoy from the library. And some of the technical services we said include cataloging, classification, accessioning, binary, database updating, and what have you. And then we also said reader services include circulation services, reference services, current awareness services, selective dissemination of information services, current awareness services, library rooms, referral services, and user education. So this is where we get to the end of our lesson. I hope you've had a very good time. Until we meet in another class, thank you very much and do have a lovely evening. I still remain Salisu Shamunbala, your facilitator for this course.